Topsoil moves. This is the thing that people who have never farmed don't understand, and that people who have farmed for 30 years sometimes forget. Topsoil, the dark, organic-rich, biologically alive layer that grows the crop, moves when water hits it on a slope. Water hits the soil. The water moves downhill. The water carries soil with it. A raindrop lands on a bare field, dislodges a grain of soil. The grain joins a film of water that joins a rill, that joins a channel, that joins a gully, that joins a ditch, that joins a creek, that carries the farmer's topsoil to the Gulf of Mexico, where it settles on the floor of the continental shelf and becomes sediment that will never grow a crop again. The farmer doesn't see the grain leave. He doesn't see the rill form. He sees the gully, the 3-foot deep trench that appears in his field after a 6-inch rain, the wound in the earth that tells him the topsoil that was there yesterday is in the creek today, and the creek carried it to the river, and the river carried it to the sea, gone. 30 years to build an inch of topsoil, one rainstorm to move it off the field. The speed at which topsoil moves depends on 3 things: the intensity of the rain, the slope of the ground, and the distance the water travels before it's slowed down. A farmer can't control the rain. A farmer can't change the slope, but a farmer can control the distance, the length of the run that the water makes from the top of the slope to the bottom, gathering speed and volume and erosive power with every foot of uninterrupted flow. Shorten the run and you slow the water, and slow the water and you save the soil. The technology for shortening the run has existed since the 1930s. The technology is a terrace, a low earthen ridge built across the slope on the contour, perpendicular to the direction of water flow, that intercepts the water as it runs downhill and channels it along the terrace at a controlled grade to a grassed waterway where it can leave the field without carrying soil. A terrace turns a 1,200-foot slope into 6 200-foot slopes. Instead of water running 1,200 feet from the hilltop to the creek, accelerating, deepening, eroding with every foot, the water runs 200 feet, hits a terrace, turns, flows along the terrace at 0.1% grade, reaches the waterway, and exits the field on grass instead of bare soil. Yet the energy of the water is distributed across 6 terraces instead of concentrated in one gully. The soil stays, the crop grows. The topsoil that took 30 years to build doesn't leave in a single storm. In Nodaway County, Missouri, the rolling Loess Hills in the northwest corner of the state, where the soil is a deep mantle of wind-deposited silt from the last ice age, some of the richest farmland in America, and some of the most erosion-prone, because Loess is silt, and silt moves with water, the way sand moves with wind. Terraces were built extensively between 1940 and 1975 as part of the Soil Conservation Service's National Erosion Control Program. Thousands of acres in the county were terraced. The earthen ridges constructed by bulldozers and graders, the grassed waterways seeded and maintained, in the system designed to keep the loess on the hilltops where the ice age had deposited it, instead of in the creek bottoms where the rain wanted to take it. Then the terraces came out. Between 1985 and 2005, approximately 40% of the terraces in Nodaway County were removed, plowed through, filled in, leveled, eliminated. The reasons were economic and technological. GPS-guided tractors, which arrived in the late 1990s and became standard by 2005, worked most efficiently in straight lines. Terraces weren't straight. They followed the contour of the hill, curving across the slope, creating odd-shaped field segments that the GPS couldn't navigate without manual intervention. A 12-row planter running on GPS auto steer could plant a straight field at 6 miles per hour without the operator touching the wheel. And the same planter in a terraced field had to slow to 4 miles per hour, navigate the curves, lift and lower row units for the terrace channels, and handle point rows at the ends of the curved strips. The efficiency loss was 15 to 25%. The time and fuel wasted on the curves and point rows that straight fields didn't have. The economics were clear. Straight fields were faster, cheaper, and more compatible with the equipment and technology that modern farming required. The terraces slowed the planter, complicated the GPS, created point rows that wasted seed and fertilizer, and reduced the effective planted acreage by 3 to 5%, because the terrace ridges and waterways occupied ground that could be cropped if the terraces were removed. On a 1,000-acre farm, the terrace reduction in planted acreage was 30 to 50 acres. 30 to 50 acres that weren't growing corn at $1,000 per acre gross. $30,000 to $50,000 per year in foregone revenue from land that was occupied by earthen ridges and grass waterways instead of corn. The terraces came out. The bulldozers that had built them in the 1950s returned in the 2000s to remove them. The earthen ridges were pushed flat, the waterways were plowed under, the fields went from contoured to straight, flat, uniform, GPS navigable, efficient, and naked. The slopes that had been protected by terraces for 50 years were exposed to the rain for the first time since the Dust Bowl had taught the county what happens when you leave soil unprotected on a slope. There was one farmer in the county who didn't remove his terraces. His name was Arthur Geib, but he farmed 640 acres outside of Guilford, a crossroads community in the eastern part of the county, population 80. The kind of place that exists on maps, but barely exists on the ground. Arthur's farm had been terraced by the SCS in 1958. His father, Leland, had enrolled in the conservation program, and the government had paid 80% of the cost of building 14 terraces across the 440 acres of cropland, with 4 grassed waterways directing the terrace water to the creek at the bottom of the property. The terraces had been maintained ever since, regraded twice in 1978 and 2002. The waterways receded once. In 1990, the system kept functional by annual attention, and the understanding passed from Leland to Arthur that the terraces were not obstacles to farming, but conditions of farming. The price of farming slopes in Loess country. Though Arthur's terraces made his fields look different from every field around him. His rows curved, his neighbors' rows were straight. His fields had grassed waterways, green strips of bromograss running from the hilltop to the creek, 30 feet wide, occupying land that could grow corn, but instead grew grass that his neighbors considered wasted. His field shapes were irregular, wedge-shaped strips between terraces, with point rows at the ends, the kind of shapes that GPS auto steer handled poorly, and that a 12-row planter navigated with difficulty. The co-op's verdict was predictable. Arthur Geib is farming around terraces that were built before he was born. He's got 30 acres of waterways, growing grass instead of corn. His point rows waste $4,000 in seed and fertilizer every year. his planter slows down 20% in the curves. Why, he's losing $50,000 a year to conservation that the government talked his father into in 1958. The $50,000 number was exaggerated. The actual cost of the terraces in reduced efficiency and lost acreage was closer to $22,000 per year. But the co-op didn't deal in accurate numbers. The co-op dealt in round numbers that made a point. And the point was that Arthur was sacrificing income to maintain earthen ridges that slowed his planter and grass strips that grew nothing marketable. The equipment dealer in Maryville, a man named Craig Strunk, who sold Case 1H equipment and GPS guidance systems, had urged Arthur to remove the terraces in 2004, 2007, and 2010. Each time, Craig had brought the efficiency data, the time savings, the fuel savings, the seed savings, the additional acreage that could be cropped. Each time, Arthur had listened. I asked one question and declined. The question was always the same. Where does the water go? What do you mean? If I remove the terraces, where does the water go when it rains? Right now, the water hits the slope, runs 200 feet, hits a terrace, turns, flows along the terrace to the waterway, and leaves the field on grass. If I remove the terraces, the water hits the slope and runs 1,200 feet to the creek without stopping. It picks up speed for 1,200 feet. It picks up soil for 1,200 feet. It arrives at the creek carrying everything it picked up along the way. My topsoil, my fertilizer, my herbicide, my crop. Where does the water go? It goes to the creek. What does it take? Everything. The no-till will hold the soil. You're no-till, Arthur. The residue protects the surface. The roots hold the soil. No-till on these hills. Even without terraces, will keep erosion below the tolerable rate. Below the tolerable rate for Marshall silt loam is 5 tons per acre per year. That's what the NRCS says is acceptable, 5 tons per acre per year. On 440 acres, that's 2,200 tons per year that the NRCS says I can lose and still maintain productivity. But tolerable doesn't mean free. Those 2,200 tons are my topsoil. Those 2,200 tons are the organic matter, the biology, the structure, the water-holding capacity of my soil. The NRCS says I can afford to lose them. I say I can't afford to lose any of them. The terraces keep my loss below 1 ton per acre, below the tolerable rate by a factor of 5. My soil isn't moving. My neighbor's soil on straight rows without terraces is moving at 3 to 7 tons per acre. They're losing soil at a rate that the NRCS calls tolerable and that I call robbery. Craig didn't pursue the argument. Dealers don't argue with farmers about soil philosophy. Dealers argue with farmers about equipment efficiency, and the efficiency argument was on Craig's side. The terraces slowed Arthur's operation. The terraces cost Arthur money. The terraces were, by every metric that the equipment dealer measured, an obstacle to profitability. The terraces were also the only thing standing between Arthur's topsoil and the creek. Now let me tell you about what Leland taught Arthur about loess, because understanding why Arthur kept his terraces requires understanding what loess is, and what it does when water finds it unprotected. The loess is silt, fine-grained mineral particles deposited by the wind during and after the last ice age. The glaciers that covered northern Missouri ground rock into powder. The wind carried the powder south and deposited it in a blanket 50 to 100 feet deep across the hilltops of northwest Missouri. The loess is what makes Nodaway County's soil rich. The silt is mineral dense, fine textured, and capable of holding water and nutrients in quantities that coarser soils can't match. The loess is also what makes Nodaway County's soil vulnerable. Silt is the most erodible of all soil textures. Sand is too heavy to move in water. Clay is too cohesive to dislodge. Silt is the Goldilocks of erosion, light enough to be carried, heavy enough to be dislodged, and fine enough to remain in suspension as water moves it off the field. A 1-inch rain on a 6% slope of bare loess soil generates approximately 8 tons of erosion per acre. A 2-inch rain generates approximately 22 tons. A 4-inch rain, the kind that happens 2 or 3 times per decade in northwest Missouri, generates approximately 45 to 60 tons per acre on unprotected slopes. No-till residue reduces these numbers by 60 to 80%, a substantial reduction, bringing the erosion from a 4-inch rain down to 9 to 12 tons per acre on a no-till field without terraces. On a terraced, no-till field, the erosion from a 4-inch rain is approximately 1 to 2 tons per acre. The terraces intercept the water, reduce the run length, and prevent the concentration of flow that creates gullies. The difference between 9 tons and 1 ton per acre seems academic in a single rain event. Over 30 years of farming, the difference is the difference between a field that has lost 270 tons of topsoil per acre and a field that has lost 30 tons. 270 tons is approximately 2 inches of topsoil. 30 tons is approximately a 1/4 inch. 2 inches of topsoil loss reduces corn yield by approximately 6 to 8% on loess soils, the equivalent of 12 to 16 bushels per acre. At $4.50 per bushel, that's $54 to $72 per acre per year in permanent yield reduction from erosion that the farmer allowed to happen by removing the terraces that prevented it. $54 to $72 per acre. On 440 acres, $23,760 to $31,680 per year in lost yield from erosion. More than the $22,000 that the terraces cost in reduced efficiency. The terraces cost Arthur $22,000 per year in slower farming. The terraces saved Arthur $23,760 to $31,680 per year in preserved yield potential. The net benefit of the terraces was positive. The soil they saved was worth more than the time they cost. But the benefit was invisible because the yield loss from erosion happened slowly, over decades, and the farmer who removed his terraces in 2005 didn't see the 6% yield reduction in 2006. He saw it in 2020 when his hilltop corn was yielding 160 bushels instead of the 175 it yielded before the terraces came out. And the yield decline was so gradual that he attributed it to weather or variety selection or fertilizer management. Anything except the 2 inches of topsoil that had washed into the creek over 15 years of unprotected farming. Arthur's yields didn't decline. His hilltop corn in 2015 yielded 195 bushels per acre. The same yield potential that the field had shown in 1995 and 1985 and 1975, because the topsoil that produced that yield was still on the hilltop held there by terraces that had been intercepting water and preventing erosion for 57 years. His neighbor's hilltop corn, in 2015, 168 to 175 bushels, down from the 185 to 190 they had produced before the terraces were removed. The decline was real, measurable, and permanent. The topsoil that left the field didn't come back, and the yield potential that left with the topsoil didn't come back either. Now let me tell you about June 2015, because the rain event that hit Nottoway County on June 18th was not a normal rain. It was the event that the terraces had been built to survive and that the straight fields had been left naked to face. I'm 5.8 inches in 3 hours. A thunderstorm complex that stalled over the county and dumped precipitation at a rate of almost 2 inches per hour. An intensity that overwhelms every erosion control practice, except physical structures that intercept the water mechanically. No-till residue can't handle 2 inches per hour. Cover crops can't handle 2 inches per hour. The infiltration rate of even the best-managed low soil is approximately 0.8 inches per hour, meaning that at 2 inches per hour, more than half the rainfall is running off the surface, and running off at a speed and volume that carries soil regardless of surface management. On the straight fields, the fields where terraces had been removed, where the water had 1,200 feet of uninterrupted slope to travel, the erosion was catastrophic. The gullies formed in the corn rows, 3 to 4 feet deep, 40 to 60 feet long, cutting through the topsoil and into the yellow subsoil below. The gullies appeared on the slopes where the terraces had been, the slopes that had been protected for 50 years and then exposed in 2005 when the bulldozer filled the terraces and the GPS straightened the rows. The subsoil that was exposed in the gullies was yellow clay, the material beneath the loess, sterile, dense, and incapable of growing a crop without years of amendment. The gullies were wounds that wouldn't heal by next season. Some wouldn't heal in a decade. The runoff from the straight fields poured into the creek, chocolate brown water, thick with silt, and carrying the topsoil off the slopes at a rate that the NRCS later estimated at 35 to 50 tons per acre on unprotected slopes with moderate steepness. The creek ran brown for 3 days after the storm. The county road culverts were blocked with sediment. The farm ponds downstream turned from blue to brown overnight, filling with the silt that had been topsoil on someone's hilltop 12 hours earlier. Arthur Gieb's terraces held. The water hit the slopes, 5.8 inches in 3 hours, the same rain, the same intensity, the same duration. The water ran 200 feet and hit the first terrace. The terrace filled. The channel behind the ridge overtopping in several locations, the water flowing along the terrace at the designed grade, reaching the grassed waterway, and exiting the field on Brahma grass that slowed the velocity and filtered the sediment. And the waterways ran full. Brown water, carrying some soil, but the volume and velocity were a fraction of what the straight fields produced, because the terraces had broken the run into 200-foot segments, and the water never had the chance to accelerate and concentrate the way it did on the unprotected slopes. Arthur's erosion from the June 18th storm, approximately 3 tons per acre. His neighbor's erosion on the straight fields, 35 to 50 tons per acre. The difference, 32 to 47 tons per acre, was the soil that Arthur kept and his neighbors lost. On 440 acres, Arthur retained approximately 14,000 to 20,000 more tons of soil than comparable acreage on straight road farms. 14,000 tons of topsoil, the thing that grows the crop, the thing that took centuries to build and 3 hours to lose. The aftermath was visible from the county road. Say Arthur's fields looked rained on, wet, some minor rilling on the steepest terrace sections, but intact. The gullies were absent, the topsoil was present, the corn was standing. The neighbors' fields looked bombed, gullies cutting through the rows, yellow subsoil exposed, corn washed out of the gully areas, sediment fans at the bottom of every slope where the runoff had deposited its load. The visual contrast between terraced and unterraced fields after a 5.8-inch rain was the kind of proof that no extension publication could provide, the proof that arrives in the form of a wound that the farmer can see from his truck window and that he knows will take years to repair, and that he knows wouldn't exist if the terraces hadn't been removed. Craig Strunk drove to Arthur's farm 2 days after the storm, and the dealer who had urged Arthur to remove his terraces in 2004, 2007, and 2010 stood at the edge of a terraced field and looked at the corn, standing undamaged, the terrace channels carrying residual water to the waterways, the soil intact, the topsoil dark and present on the hilltops, where the loess had been deposited 10,000 years ago. Arthur, Craig, I told you to take these out 3 times. I showed you the efficiency data. I calculated the point row waste. I told you the GPS couldn't handle the curves. I was right about all of that. The terraces slow your planter, they waste seed, they complicate the guidance system. But I was wrong about the thing that matters. The terraces hold the soil grows the crop. Without the soil, the equipment doesn't matter. The GPS doesn't matter. The planter speed doesn't matter. And nothing matters if the soil is in the creek. My father told me one thing about these terraces. He said, the government paid to build them. I paid to maintain them. The terraces pay for themselves by keeping the soil on the hill. The day I take them out is the day the soil leaves. And when the soil leaves, it doesn't come back in my lifetime. He said that in 1972. It's 2015. Every word is still true. My customers who took their terraces out are looking at gullies in their fields today. 3-foot gullies, yellow subsoil, corn washed out. The topsoil is in the creek is in the river is in the Gulf. The soil is gone, Arthur, it's not coming back. And the yield on those hilltops is never going to be what it was before the terraces came out. I know. In the soil that left those fields between 2005 and 2015, the years without terraces, is somewhere on the bottom of the Missouri River. The yield that goes with that soil is gone too. A 6 to 8% reduction on the hilltops. Permanent. For the rest of their farming lives and their children's farming lives and their grandchildren's farming lives, those hilltops will produce less because the topsoil that produced the yield isn't there anymore. The terraces cost me $22,000 a year in efficiency. The soil that my neighbors lost in 10 years of unprotected farming will cost them $23,000 to $31,000 per year in reduced yields, forever. My $22,000 is an annual cost I can manage. Their $23,000 to $31,000 is a permanent loss they can never recover. Craig drove home. He didn't stop selling GPS guidance systems. He didn't stop promoting straight row farming. But he started telling his customers something that he hadn't told them before. something that an equipment dealer who makes his living from the speed of straight rows probably shouldn't say, but that Craig felt compelled to say. After standing in Arthur's terraced field and looking at the undamaged corn, while the fields around it were gullied to the subsoil. "Keep the terraces," Craig told his customers. "Program the GPS to follow the contour. It's slower, it's less efficient, it wastes point rows. But the terraces are holding your soil on the hill, and the soil is worth more than the time you save by running straight. The GPS can follow a curve. The GPS will learn the terrace. The GPS is software. It can be updated. The topsoil is geology. Once it's gone, it's gone." 3 farmers in the county rebuilt terraces in 2016. Rebuilt them on fields where the terraces had been removed 10 years earlier, and where the June 2015 storm had created gullies that proved the removal was a mistake. The cost of rebuilding was approximately $150 to $200 per acre, 3 to 4 times the original 1958 cost, because the gullies had to be filled before the terraces could be built, and the waterways had to be re-established from bare ground. The farmers paid the full cost. No government cost share this time, because the CRP and EQIP budgets were allocated to new conservation, not to rebuilding conservation that had been voluntarily removed. Arthur's terraces stand, 14 ridges, across 440 acres of cropland, maintained by Arthur and now by his son, Mitchell, who farms the 640 acres and maintains the terraces the way Leland maintained them and Arthur maintained them. Annual inspection, spot repair, regrading every 20 to 25 years. The waterways mowed and maintained as grass strips that carry the water off the field without carrying the soil with it. The terraces cost the Gieb family $22,000 per year in reduced efficiency. The terraces have preserved approximately 470 tons of topsoil per year that would have been lost to erosion if the terraces had been removed. A total of approximately 15,500 tons over 33 years since the removal trend began in 1982. 15,500 tons of topsoil, the thing that grows the crop. The thing that can't be manufactured, can't be purchased, can't be trucked in from somewhere else. Topsoil is built by biology and time, the accumulation of organic matter. The activity of earthworms and fungi and bacteria, the slow conversion of mineral silt into living soil. An inch per century, a century per inch. The terraces protect the inches, the straight rows spend them. Let me tell you about how this ends. Arthur Gieb is 69 years old. Mitchell runs the Farmall 1066 on the terraced fields. The tractor that Leland bought in 1975 and that Arthur rebuilt in 2001 and that Mitchell uses for the terrace maintenance work, because the old tractor fits between the terrace ridges better than the wider modern equipment. Yet the Farmall's narrow front and tight turning radius make it the right tool for regrading terrace channels and cleaning waterway inlets. The maintenance work that keeps the terraces functional and that nobody does on the farms where the terraces were removed because there are no terraces to maintain. The yields tell the story. Arthur's hilltop corn, in 2015, 195 bushels per acre. His neighbor's hilltop corn on deterraced fields, 168 to 175. The gap, 20 to 27 bushels per acre, is the soil. The gap will widen every year because Arthur's soil is staying and his neighbor's soil is leaving. In 10 years, the gap will be 30 to 40 bushels. In 20 years, the gap will be 40 to 50. The soil loss is cumulative. The yield loss is permanent. The terraces are the difference. I farm crooked rows, Arthur says, when someone asks about his terraces. Yeah, my neighbors farm straight rows. Their GPS works better than mine. Their planter is faster. Their fields are more efficient. But my soil is on my hilltop and theirs is in the creek. I'd rather have slow rows and topsoil than fast rows and subsoil. The crop grows in the soil, not in the GPS. And the soil stays on the hill if the terrace tells the water to turn. The rain took their topsoil in 2015. The Terraces kept his. That's the whole story. Subscribe to The Vintage Farmer for more. We'll see you in the next one.